And I feel like that's so emblematic of Tulsa. Like there's a real kindness here.
Hi, I'm Justin Harlan, Managing Director for Tulsa Remote, and we are here with another episode of Remote With. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Alex Poppe, who has been in Tulsa for a couple of years now. I'm looking forward to having this conversation and learning about your journey here, what has come out of your experience here in Tulsa, and what the future holds. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, so let's just start with how did you find out about Tulsa? How did Tulsa even get onto your radar as something that you wanted to consider?
When I was living in Iraq and thinking about if I come back to the States, where do I want to live? I have metrics that I evaluate a city on, and some of them are very shallow.
Okay,
So
this is a great place to start.
I look at things like live music, how much live music is in a city, and I was so surprised to see how much there is. You know, people talk about Nashville and Austin and Chicago, but they don't necessarily talk about Tulsa.
Yeah.
But the musicians here are so good. And maybe this is just my friends' bands in Chicago, but a lot of them, they can play, but maybe they can't really sing, or they can sing and they really can't play. But every group I've ever seen in Tulsa, everybody can do everything and do it so well. So that was a great surprise. And then I looked at public transportation, which is really not great here. So that was like the only thing that faltered. So I was curious enough. I was really excited about the arts district and the art scene. And then when I came down for the Tulsa Remotes trip, everybody was super friendly. And that was like, yes, that made up my mind.
Okay, so friendly people, great art scene, awesome music, public transportation. All right, everybody's got their good and bad, so
Right.
we'll take that. So you were teaching over in Iraq,
Mhm.
and then you made the decision to come back to the United States. So what were you up to then? And obviously to relocate with Tulsa Remote, you have to have a remote job. So what were you doing at that time that allowed you to relocate back to the States?
I had resigned from my job and then the pandemic struck. And so I rescinded my letter of resignation, and I was very grateful the university accepted that so I could stay employed. And it was really tricky to be in northern Iraq during COVID. So I finished that contract, and I was able to get a remote job with a smaller NGO. And that allowed me to come back to the United States. And then I was able to apply for Tulsa Remote because I had a remote job. I had the series of interviews, and I was like, God, I hope I get it. God, I hope I get it. And I remember my aunt was over for dinner, and I got the call that I got invited to come to Tulsa Remote. I was like shrieking in the hallways. My mom and my aunt were like, and I was like, yay, I'm going to Tulsa.
And then was it Tulsa Remote that put Tulsa on your radar to begin with? Or were you looking into Tulsa in advance? Or how did that all kind of go down?
Well, I knew about Tulsa from the Artist Fellowship, but
Okay.
then the Tulsa Remote made it very attractive. Because it's hard to make friends when you're older and you haven't gotten married or had kids or, haven't lived in the United States for a long time. So it's not like I have a lot of network of friends in the U.S. My friends are in a lot of different countries abroad. So knowing that you did so much programming and activities to really get us engaged and involved was the selling point and also a big hook. I checked out nonprofits that I wanted to work with because they have that program that will train you to be on a board.
Mm-hmm.
So I found the Soraya Ann Foundation before I even moved. Then I right away took the Leadership Tulsa program, which was great. And there's so much synergy. It's so easy. They're like no gatekeepers. I can't imagine rolling up to Chicago after being gone for decades and like, hey, I want to work on the mayoral campaign.
Right.
There's just not that access. Where here in Tulsa, it's like, if you have anything of a skills to value, people are like, yeah, come play with us.
Yeah.
And I love that about it.
That's great. Yeah. The low barrier of entry, no gatekeeping. It doesn't feel competitive. Like everybody's kind of trying to help each other win. I'd love to dig in more to your decision to get involved with Monroe and all of that. We'll give some context there. But I'd love to just kind of go back a little bit first. So you mentioned you were living in Iraq. You were teaching there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about the work you were doing there. And I'd love to hear too, what was it about that experience that maybe prepared you for the move to Tulsa and kind of the way in which you've initiated those connections and involvement here?
So I lived in northern Iraq for 2 different periods. So one, I taught at international high school in Erbil and did volunteer work in the city. And then I went to Germany for 2 years. And then I went and taught at a university on the other side of northern Iraq in a city called Sulaymaniyah. And it was great. Like there's a lot of work, and a lot of the times it's boring, but every once in a while something phenomenal happens,
Yeah.
and you find yourself in a position that I would have never thought I would have been in. So, the students have these lived experiences that we don't always see depicted in mainstream media, in films and TV shows about war and violent conflict. And they'll tell you these stories that will literally break your heart,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not hardened.
Mm.
They're resilient, and they're compassionate, and they're very generous. And I'm always like, wow, how? But yet they are. And so this belief that, people are really the same everywhere. We kind of all want the same things for ourselves
Yeah.
and our families makes it easy for me anyway to leap into a new place. And I know that it's going to work out. It might take a little bit of time, but I think people are good everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's institutions around them that succeed or fail. It's poor governance. It's a lack of plurality of voices at the decision-making table. But people themselves, they're good. And there's a great book Anna Bodkin wrote long time ago called Piecemeals, Candy Wrap Kalashnikovs. And she went all through Afghanistan. She was a Boston Globe reporter at the time. And she was saying, like, you could sit down at a feast with a warlord, or you could meet like a shepherd who's digging through like sheep dung to find kernels to eat. And either one will share that meal with you.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as we have that part of our humanity intact, like we're going to survive, like we'll be able to find a way through conflict. Those sentiments have always stuck with me, and they really kind of played out in Tulsa. I can remember walking to the dry cleaner near Mercury Lounge, and I didn't have an umbrella, and it was raining, and I asked the woman behind the counter, like, hey, is there a place to buy a dry cleaner or buy an umbrella here? And she said, oh, you can check at that store, and they were closed, and I came back, and this woman who had been behind me in line was getting in her car, and so she saw me walk back, and she gets out of her car with an umbrella, and she's like, did you find an umbrella? And I'm like, no, and she's like, here, take this. I was like, what? She's like, take this. I have an extra and I have a car. And I feel like that's so emblematic of Tulsa. Like there's a real kindness here.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can see it in the sense there's so many churches here. And yet there are over 150 nonprofits in a city that's got 500,000 population.
Yeah.
So people recognize that there's a need and they're willing to fill it. I think that speaks volumes about Tulsans.
I totally agree. That was one of the things in my previous job at Reading Partners that just always blew me away. At our peak, we had 2,000 volunteers that were showing up every week to read with kids in schools across the city. And just that level of generosity and kind spirit and, being active in the problem solving across the city as opposed to just expecting others to do it for you. But I love the perspective that you bring in. And I mean, I think just like the way that you show up in spaces as present and listening and loving on others, you're such a thoughtful person too. And I think it's so representative of, the lived experience that you have and what you've seen across the world. And it's just so valuable, I think, to have that type of lens to see, to create your worldview over time. And I think it shows up in all the interactions that you have too, which I really appreciate and respect about you. So I would love to talk about Monroe and your involvement with his campaign. So for those listening, Tulsa just elected its first Black mayor, which is so exciting. This is a big transition. And so I would be curious, for somebody who's new to town, like why were you inspired to get involved with Monroe, and what was it that spoke to you about his campaign?
He's so real. He came to a Leadership Tulsa to meet the cohort and answer questions. And my question to him was like, I don't belong to a church. I don't have children. I'm not married. And I'm a newcomer here. No one's going to vote for me. And he laughed and he asked, where I had been. And so Iraq stuck out in his mind. So when I saw him again, I was like, hey, I want to volunteer for do you remember me? And he was like, yeah, and you were there. He brought me in for a hug. He's really personable. But he, from the very beginning, knew why he was running and what the platform was about.
Yeah.
And he had a very holistic view. And I'm going to be critical of certain leaders that don't think big picture. He always has. So, for example, he's like, if we want to improve public school education outcomes, we have to address homelessness because 10% of first graders are homeless. And he built a platform that had a holistic approach to solving the city's most pressing issues.
Mm-hmm.
So safety, upskilling for job creation, public school outcomes, which goes into upskilling and job training.
Sure.
And then he's very data-driven. He's not afraid to be held accountable by that data. So he's just full of integrity. And I feel like that was the very first thing I saw when I met him that first time at Leadership Tulsa. I really felt at that moment he was a once-in-a-generation candidate because of his integrity. And then you see it's genuine because his entire professional life has been steeped in public service.
Right.
And then you learn more about his family background and you're like, yeah, of course. This is why he thinks how he thinks.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. And I think what's, first of all, so excited about, what the future holds here in Tulsa. I think it's a big moment for us as a city. Also just want to pull out like the fact that you are so new, but got involved and took yourself off the couch and kind of, got directly involved in the future of the city. And I think that's one thing that is special about this place. And to your point earlier about just like lower barriers and less gatekeeping, there's a way to contribute here in Tulsa and make a difference. And I think your voice is heard and there's very tangible ways to get involved, whether you're actually running for office or supporting somebody that is. And I think that's one of the things that's beautiful about this place as opposed to larger cities where, maybe the bubbles are a little bit more exclusive. So it's awesome to hear that you've gotten involved in that way. Let's talk about the art scene that you mentioned earlier. So I know you were initially interested in Tulsa Artist Fellowship, and that's a program that you can look up online if you're listening, but it's a fellowship that also pays you to relocate, and you're doing some work as an artist here in Tulsa. What were you doing as an artist? I know you've had kind of different, different lanes as an artist, and I know that you recently also had a book. What is that even called? A reveal, or you released a book?
No, Pat at Magic City Books.
Yes.
Please support independent bookstores. Go to Magic City Books. He was very gracious to give me an event for prior work.
Okay, got it.
So I have a book coming out in May, except we're having issues on the cover design, so I'm wondering if it might get pushed to June.
Okay.
But so that was the book event, which Monroe very generously came to, even though he and Dana were running through between events. They came, which I was cool. I couldn't believe it,
Yes.
I couldn't believe it.
So talk about your path as an artist too. And, what has surprised you most about Tulsa's art scene?
Wow. Okay. So I'm a writer, but being here always makes me wish I were a visual artist. There's so much here. So I know you probably know Anne Puller James.
Mm-hmm, of course.
I love her work. Listening to her journey, I think she's self-taught during the pandemic, was like, wow, everything is really accessible here, My journey as a writer was a little different. I didn't start writing till 2010. But in Tulsa, there's so much creative stimulation.
Mm-hmm.
So the music scene and the visual art scene are enough to creatively inspire the writing. And then Magic City, again, punches above its weight by the caliber of writers they have come in for events.
Yeah.
Michael Cunningham.
Right. It's amazing the people they bring in. Yeah.
I know. He was amazing. He didn't put a barrier between himself and the audience. He shook hands, hugged people, took photos. It's like, you're Michael Cunningham. So the writing scene, the whole art scene's been really surprising because it's a smaller city and you don't always expect to find it. But because it is smaller, you know where to go, as opposed to, sometimes in Chicago, there'll be just so many competing events, all with big names.
Yeah.
There's no possible way to be in all the places at the same time.
Given all the experience that you've had, what do you think is most memorable, or what will you carry with you most from your experience in Tulsa so far? Like, what's the thing that, because you have such a vast background, and I think so many diverse lived experiences. I'm just curious, like, what do you think you'll take from this place, regardless of how long you live here?
I hope my friendships carry on. The book event at Magic City was very special because I mean, I was afraid no one was going to show up, and it was pretty crowded. And it was, musicians from the Tulsa music scene were there, and artists were there, and political people were there. And I looked out into the room and I was like, wow, this is everything I care about converging in one place. It felt really magical. Um, Great friendships through Tulsa Remote. Grace, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
she's back in Denver, but we're still very close. She's like family. Um, I don't know. I don't know what's been memorable. I feel like I work a little too much, so part of it goes by in a whirl,
Yeah.
and I feel like I haven't been as present, intentionally present as I like to be, because I feel pulled in a bit too many directions lately. If I get very quiet, the overwhelming theme for me is kindness, because I
Mm.
feel like just strangers on the street give it to you. You're walking on the street and people say, "Hi, how are you?"
Yeah.
And it still takes me by surprise. Like, that's after living in New York for over a decade. It's like,
Right.
what are you doing?
Why are you talking to me?
Right.
Yes.
So I feel like, yeah, the kindness, I just have seen and experienced exceptional kindness here.
That's awesome. And what would you say has changed, like, most about your life?
I haven't like set up my own home, because you get it when you're in some teaching contracts, you have housing provided for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always like, well, I'm here for a year. I'm here for 2 years. I mean, it was 8, but I never really decorated. So it's like the first time I've intentionally decorated. And it's, you're like, you're not sitting on the couch. And I'm thinking to myself, I just bought my couch like 2 weeks ago and put it together right before
Well,
Thanksgiving.
then you had no choice. You
I didn't
couldn't.
have any
Yeah.
furniture. I had the bed, the desk, and the chair. That's it. So it's a place where I feel like I'm nesting and setting up a
Yeah.
home, which is a new feeling. And I'm still kind of wrestling with like that dog whistle of restlessness. Like, part of me is itching to be in the field.
Yeah.
But then I remember it was an intentional choice to come back to the United States and set up roots and community. And I intentionally chose Tulsa because I felt like there was so much support through Tulsa Remote to build those relationships that I would have a sense of community.
Mm-hmm.
It took a while to build a community, because people had their lives and their families and their friends. And I'm very grateful that I have that sense of friendship from so many Tulsa Remoters, and then people outside of Tulsa Remote as well. And it's like, I actually have a life here. I don't want to just walk away from that.
Yeah.
You
It's
know?
awesome.
Yeah.
We think a lot about just like what community means. I think over the last, at least when I've been going to conferences and things like that over the last year, maybe 2, community, I think, has become like a consistent buzzword. You hear it a lot.
Yeah.
And so what I've been thinking a ton about and reading about is just like, what do we mean by that? And like, obviously at Tulsa Remote, we're trying to kind of create a prescription for finding community and integrating into the community that's here. And there's somebody that I read recently that was kind of tied to what you just said, which is that community is home. And when you really commit to a place and find, like, settle in and get the couch and see this as something that's like bigger than yourself, that's when you feel at home. And that's when you find community, when it's not just this thing that you're going to do for a short term and then transition to something else, but it's something you're committed to. And that to me is really powerful. And I love hearing that from you. Of just like, I've got people here. I love the vibe. The arts are feeding my soul. And you're finding a lot of ways to commit to yourself personally and also leave this place, better than when you arrived, which I really appreciate that. And just love the ways in which you've made not only your own community come to life, but also contributed to the communities that others are forming within Tulsa Remote and Tulsa. So with that, I want to thank you for making time for us today. And just appreciate all that you do for the community at Tulsa Remote, but also the city. So thanks for being here, Alex.
Thank you, Justin. I don't take compliments well. It's a bit overwhelming. I'm very grateful for everything TR has done for me. And I can honestly say all of everything that's good in my life starts with TR. It really does, because you brought me down. That's how I learned about Leadership Tulsa. That's how I found out about Monroe. One of my closest friends introduced me to the contracting company that helped me get hired at USAID. So everything really is rooted to Tulsa Remote.
Yeah. Well,
So
we don't
thank
take
you.
that lightly. Yeah. We're grateful for the opportunity to make those connections and help you find this new life. And I'm glad you're thriving in it.